Euzubillahimineşşeytanirracim. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Rabbi şrah li sadri ve yessir li emri ve hlul min lisani yefqahu kavli. Allahumme salli aleyhi. Selamun aleyküm ve rahmetullahi ve berekatuhu. Inshallah everyone is doing great while fasting. So we will continue with the 24th word, third branch, and 12th principle.
Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. 12th principle on the words, 24th word. Since prophethood, the affirmation of divine unity and belief all look to unity, the hereafter, and divinity. They see truth and reality in accordance with those, while philosophers and scientists look to multiplicity, causes, and nature, and see in accordance with them. Their points of view are extremely distant from one another. The greatest aim of the people of philosophy is so small and insignificant as to be imperceptible among the aims of the scholars of religion and theology. The greatest aim of the people of philosophy is so small and insignificant as to be imperceptible among the aims of the scholars of religion and theology. It is because of this that scientists have advanced greatly in detailed explanation of the nature of beings and their minutest states, but they are so far behind the exalted divine sciences and sciences concerned with the hereafter, which are true wisdom and knowledge. But they are so far behind the exalted divine sciences and sciences concerned with the hereafter, which are true wisdom and knowledge, that they are more backward than a simple believer. Those who do not understand this mystery suppose the investigative scholars of Islam to be relatively backward to the philosophers. But how can those whose minds see no further than their eyes and are submerged in multiplicity reach those who follow elevated sacred aims through the legacy of prophethood? Those who do not understand this mystery suppose the investigative scholars of Islam to be relatively backward to the philosophers. But how can those whose minds see no further than their eyes and are submerged in multiplicity reach those who follow elevated sacred aims through the legacy of prophethood? Furthermore, when something is considered from 2 points of view, it shows 2 different truths, and both of them may be the truth. No certain fact of science can touch the sacred truths of the Quran. The shorthand of science cannot reach up to its pure sublimity. When something is considered from 2 points of view, it shows 2 different truths, and both of them may be the truth. No certain fact of science can touch the sacred truths of the Quran. Hold on one second. The shorthand of science cannot reach up to its pure sublimity. We shall mention an example to illustrate this. For example, if the globe of the earth is considered from the point of view of the people of science, its reality is this: as a middle-sized planet, which revolves around the sun amid countless stars, it is a small creature in relation to the stars. But as is explained in the 15th word, if it is considered from the point of view of the people of the Quran, its reality is this: since man, the fruit of the world, is a most comprehensive, most wondrous, most impotent, most weak, and most subtle miracle of divine power, the earth, his cradle and dwelling place, is in regard to meaning and art, the universe's heart and center, despite its smallness and lowliness in relation to the heavens. It is the display and exhibition of all the miracles of divine art, the place of reflection and point of focus of the manifestations of all the divine names, the place of display and reflection of infinite dominical activity, the means and market of boundless divine creativity, and especially the munificent creation of the numerous species of plants and small animals, and the place in small measure of samples of the creatures of the broad worlds of the hereafter. The place in small measure of samples of the creatures of the broad worlds of the hereafter. It is a rapidly working, loom-weaving, everlasting textiles, the swiftly changing place producing views for eternal panoramas, and the narrow and temporary arable field and seedbed producing at speed the seeds for everlasting gardens. It is because of this vastness of meaning and importance of art of the earth that the all-wise Quran holds it, like a tiny fruit of the vast tree of the heavens. Because of this vastness of meaning and importance of art of the earth, that the all-wise Quran holds it, like a tiny fruit of the vast tree of the heavens, equal to all the heavens, like holding a tiny heart equivalent to a huge body. It places in one pan of a scales and places all the heavens in the other. It places it in one pan of scales and places all the heavens in the other, and repeatedly says, Sustainer of the heavens and the earth. Compare other matters with this, and understand that the soulless, dim truths of philosophy cannot clash with the brilliant, living truths of the Quran. Since the point of view is different, they appear differently.
Jazakallah khairan. Very deep or interesting principle, I'd say. I had a lot of questions and uncertainties as I was reading it, and also it intrigued me. So I think I will enjoy trying to dive in this with all of you to understand it. May God give us knowledge and understanding of it, inshallah. So we can start from the first paragraph. Since prophethood, the affirmation of divine unity, and belief all look to unity, the hereafter, and divinity, they see truth and reality in accordance with those. While philosophers and scientists look to multiplicity, causes, and nature, and see in accordance with them. Their points of view are extremely distant from one another. The greatest aim of the people of philosophy is so small and insignificant as to be imperceptible among the aims of the scholars of religion and theology. So we're talking about two different views, two different perspectives. One perspective is the side of prophethood or affirmation of divine unity, hereafter. And when you look from this perspective of, let's say, belief, you see a truth and reality that is in accordance with them. However, on the other hand, if you look with the perspective that philosophers and scientists do, where you're looking at causes and nature and the multiplicity of things, and then you will see in accordance with them. So the perspective you're looking from is very important. Just like the initial thoughts I'm having from this. Well, for the first one, he says they see truth and reality in accordance with those. So he's saying with the perspective of belief, you see truth and reality. While he's saying these other people, when you look from their perspective, they see something else. They see in accordance with their multiplicity, causes, and nature. On one hand, this is scary because let's say you are one of these philosophers and scientists, and or let's say I am one of these people that looks at the world with multiplicity, and I look at causes, and I look at nature, and I see things in that view. But if I see them in that view, then how will I ever then, let's say, switch over to the other view of, looking at through the perspective of belief, the lens of belief, the lens of prophethood. Because you see the world as you look at it, and if you're only looking at the multiplicity of it, then that's what you will get out of it. However, there is an emphasis that the truth is in the first view, and the truth is not in the second one. So that could be your guide. The fact that you are left lacking of some truth or some fulfillment. Anyways, we can go with the second paragraph. He digs deeper into this, but yeah, just think on these, and inshallah we'll dive into the topic more as we go along. It is because of this that scientists have advanced greatly in detailed explanation of the nature of beings in their minutest states. But they are so far behind the exalted divine sciences and sciences concerned with the hereafter, which are true wisdom and knowledge, that they are more backward than a simple believer. Those who do not understand this mystery suppose the investigative scholars of Islam to be relatively backward to the philosophers. But how can those whose minds see no further than their eyes and are submerged in multiplicity reach those who follow elevated sacred aims through the legacy of prophethood? I mean, because we've been studying Nursi up until now, because there's a certain methodology that he has in place and that we're learning from, and he's our teacher, when I read this, I am not repulsed, because I know when it comes from him, he's saying something deeper, and I need to dig into it more. However, if I was just reading this from any other person, I just read it in the text, I wouldn't, I would be like, oh, belief is an elevated sacred science. Actually, the philosophers are the ones who are backwards, and belief is the elevated sacred thing because they're following the legacy of prophet. It seems like, you're just uttering memorized words, almost. You're just making something very sacred and mystical in some ways. However, here, well, firstly, I do want to touch on the fact that there seems to be a divide. There are two different things, almost. I don't believe that that is the case. I don't think we're going to conclude with that. But in the beginning, it seems that there's a divide, that scientists are looking at the nature of beings and the minutest state. They're observing the earth and reality, or like they're observing what we see. But then on the other hand, we have these people who are concerned with the divine sciences, the exalted divine sciences. And, they're not dealing with this like mundane or like simple matters of like just observing the world. They're dealing with these sciences of concerned with the hereafter, about what's going to happen after this world, or concerned with religion and God. And this is where the true wisdom and knowledge is. So that's like the initial feeling I get, that this is what it is saying. And I'm not fully, if I was take it to say that I'm not fully satisfied with that interpretation, because it seems like to be splitting up two things, and one side is science, the other side is religion, and it's a very secular view. But let's continue on. Furthermore, when something is considered from 2 points of view, it shows two different truths, and both of them may be the truth. No certain fact of science can touch the sacred truths of the Quran. The shorthand of science cannot reach up to its pure sublimity. We shall mention an example to illustrate this. So apparently, when I consider things from 2 points of view, I see two different truths, and both of them may be true. Like initially, in the first paragraph, we're talking about how, with the perspective of belief, perspective of prophethood, that's where they see truth and reality. But then scientists and philosophers look from a different perspective. They look from a perspective of multiplicity and causes, and they don't see truth in that perspective. However, now Nursi's bringing up this point that actually, I mean, it's a generally true point, that when you look at something from 2 points of view, you may see two different truths, and both of them may be true. It is true. Both of them may be true. But then he connects it with saying, no certain fact of science can touch the sacred truths of the Quran. I think here he's saying potentially two different points of view can be true. So scientists look from a different perspective, and then scholars look from a different perspective. So potentially two different points of view can be true, but he's saying that the scholars, or the perspective of belief, is much, much greater than the perspective that science can bring. Like, it's not just a matter of like, you know, that is their opinion or that's their point of view, let them be, and this is my point of view. It's not a matter of point of view almost. It's like, it's a matter that this is the truth. There's this point of view is much greater than any point of view or ideas that scientists can come with. The shorthand of science cannot reach up to its pure sublimity. Yeah, again, the point of view of science is not anything comparable to what the perspective of belief brings to you, is what Nursi is claiming here. He gives an example. Before the example, Brother Birkan has his hand up. Please go ahead.
Jazakallah khairan. I just want to share my idea about the paragraph you just read. When something is considered from 2 points of view, it shows 2 different truths, and both of them may be the truth. No certain facts of science can touch the sacred truths of the Quran. So I remember we were discussing something similar a few weeks ago. By then I said, you know, we spent too much time talking about the truth, but truth itself, like, it doesn't mean much. I guess this author here is saying something similar, like whether I have 10 books or 9 books on my table, somebody comes and tells me that, oh, there are 10 books. This is true, yes, there are 10 books, but it doesn't mean much in the context in which I'm worried about, let's say, the recent health issues. So here, the author is saying that, yes, whatever science or whatever thinkers is talking about, it might be true. It might be true. They would say, you know, that many cells are there in a body, or the plants generates energy using such a, I don't know, the process, so on and so forth, and they will be all true. So you cannot say that, no, they are not true, I have a bigger truth. No, they are true, but they don't mean much. They wouldn't, you know, the way in the same scale with the truth that Quran teaches us, that Quran brings forward. So just because something is true, it doesn't mean that it has an inherent value for a human being.
Yeah, thank you. That is a great point. Like, scientists, you know, it is true that 2 hydrogen atoms, H2O, right? Yeah, 2 hydrogen atoms and then 1 oxygen atom, you know, you combine and it becomes water. You know, this is true. But it is such a, let's say, distant truth. It doesn't really touch me to my core, or it doesn't solve my problems, or it doesn't, let's say, it's not something valuable for me, because it's true, but it's not practical for me, or something personal for me. Thank you. Then I'll go into just as example. Oh, Mohammed Said, please go ahead.
This 2 approach to point of views. Why there are 2 point of views? I was asking this question, and for me, it is related to kind of asking this question, whether I'm asking this question that yes, there is a working system I am experiencing, but how come it is here? How come I find myself here, or how come this planet Earth is revolving? And I think when I cut my relationship off with this question, I am left with the things themselves, and I just focus. So this is the second point of view, because when I ignore this important question, then I ignore the possible answers or possible answers, yes, say answers that are related to this question, that are addressing to this question, like addressing this question of how come it is here. When I ignore the question of how come it is here, then I'm left with the things, and then I have to focus, the relationship between the things and how they work, and then I claim that it works, but I there's nothing related to the reality of this existing system in my point of view. So my point of view ignores the most important question related to this this universe that is like, how come it is here? And when I ignore that question, I'm left with the things themselves, and then following up this point of view, and I see it is working, and then it becomes the only reason for me to indulge in the things themselves, because it works. But I'm still ignoring how come they are working. The question of how come they are working, why they are working. So it is not a like quote unquote religious endeavor. It is it is related to this really fundamental question that human being actually can easily ask: how come it is here? Because it is here. I'm experiencing here. But definitely it is on me to choose to ask this question or not.
Thank you. From what you said, what I understand is, or how I'm interpreting it for myself is, I see that humans, let's say we have many questions, and like one of our questions or one of our interests is, exploring the earth, exploring this area we live in, and trying to observe it and make deductions off of it and make conclusions. We have such an interest, and doing science or looking from that perspective, it kind of, we're, let's say, following that interest and trying to questioning the world through the interest of how does this look, or how do I observe this. And when I do science, it answers that small question I have, but there is, let's say, a much bigger question out there that I also have, which might be like, why do I exist, or how does this even come to be? These types of questions. And if I'm only looking with this perspective of multiplicity and numbers and causes and just scientific point of view, then this big question I have will never be fulfilled. I'll never be able to find answers for that, and I will only be satisfied with those little questions I had. Or how does this, observing the universe and looking at it, which is what science does. Thank you, Brother Bitcoin. Go ahead.
When I was discussing, the different truth, I said it would be irrelevant. But I guess here in text, the author says something even more stronger. He says it might be true, but if you follow this point of view, it will even harm you. It will even deprive you from certain other truths, which is more beneficial for you. And then he will give an example. But I just wanted to highlight this fact that it's not just irrelevant, that I'm not interested in whether the water molecule consisting of 2 hydrogen, 1 oxygen. I'm not interested, so it's not irrelevant. It's not relevant to me. This is not the case. Like, this is not the point that author is making. Author is saying that if you follow this truth, and if you try to build your life on top of this, it will harm you. It's not only irrelevant, but it will also harm you. And I guess we will see how it will harm us through the example.
Yes, inshallah. Let's see. For example, I'll share the link once more. For example, if the globe of the earth is considered from the point of view of the people of science, its reality is this. As a middle-sized planet, it revolves around the sun amid countless stars. It is a small creature in relation to the stars. But as is explained in the 15th word, if it is considered from the point of view of the people of the Quran, its reality is this. So both are realities from different perspectives. Since man, the fruit of the world, is the most comprehensive, most wondrous, most impotent, most weak, and most subtle miracle of the divine power, the earth, his cradle and dwelling place, man's cradle and man's dwelling place, is in regard to meaning and art, the universe's heart and center. Despite its smallness and lowliness in relation to the heavens, it is the display and exhibition of all the miracles of divine art, the place of reflection and point of focus of the manifestations of all the divine names, the place of display and reflection of infinite dominical activity, the means and market of boundless divine creativity, and especially the magnificent creation of the numerous species of plants and small animals, and the place in small measure of samples of the creatures of the broad worlds of the hereafter. It is a rapidly working loom, weaving everlasting textiles, the swiftly changing place producing views for eternal panoramas, and the narrow and temporary arable field and seedbed producing at speed the seeds for everlasting gardens. Okay, I'll read the last paragraph as well. It is because of this vastness of meaning and importance of art of the earth that the all-wise Quran holds it, like a tiny fruit of the vast tree of the heavens, equal to all the heavens, like holding a tiny heart equivalent to a huge body. It places it in one pan of a scales and places all the heavens in the other, and repeatedly says, Sustainer of the heavens and the earth. Compare other matters with this and understand that the soulless, dim truths of philosophy cannot clash with the brilliant, living truths of the Quran. Since the point of view is different, they appear different. So he says this here too. He says, understand that the soulless, dim truths of philosophy, so they're still truths, but they're very dim truths of philosophy, cannot clash with the brilliant, living truths of the Quran. So coming back to the example, I mean, Nursi puts it very well. If you approach from a scientific point of view, what is Earth? Then, some astrophysics person or astronomer will be like, Earth is this rock that is flying around the sun in this galaxy, we're this many light years away from this, it has this many planets, this, just a bunch of facts maybe they can throw at you, a bunch of observations about what Earth is they can throw at you. But then with this perspective of belief, he says point of view of the people of the Quran. He says people of the Quran, which is interesting terminology in itself, since we've been talking about prophethood, and he previously also said legacy of prophethood, and now he's saying consider from the point of view of the people of the Quran. So I think he's like intentionally throwing these terminologies in there, these words in there. So when you're a people of the Quran, you see that this earth, it's something much more than a rock. It's something much more than just something that's flying around a star. Actually, from your perspective, this earth is the center. It's what you are most it's like very valuable for you, because you see that it is it is like a cradle for you. It is something that is like beautifully drawn, beautifully created. It's a place where you can reflect. It's a place where bounties are displayed, and like you can see the divine names. It's a place where, you know, so many things are happening. You know, he just like goes on and on about, you know, he says everlasting textiles on this earth. He says it's swiftly changing. He says eternal panoramas. The swiftly changing place producing views for eternal panoramas. I mean the wording is very beautiful. So like his perspective of earth is much more like, let's say, it's awe-inspiring, and it's very enjoyable to read compared to that perspective of the scientist. Brother Yusuf had his hand up first. Please go ahead.
Up to 12th point, the author was talking about hadith in general. But now in the 12th, he started talking about scholars of Islam, or let me find scholars of religion and theology. So why did he make this change while he was discussing the topic of hadith? This was something interesting, because he didn't mention hadith at all in here. I mean, okay, it's understandable the topic is still related to the same thing, but the focus as if has shifted from interpretation of hadith to different points of view of philosophy versus scholars of theology and religion. So why is that transition? And while I was thinking about that, an answer, a possible answer, and I would like to hear what your take in that is, as if author is also, as he was pointing to in the 11th point, talking about what is it that make me challenge, if you like, or find it unreasonable in the hadith. It is sort of a mindset. So my mindset is saying that the perspective of philosophy makes more sense. The perspective, or at least what is being narrated on the face value, doesn't seem that much reasonable. But it's not only because so far the author was talking about how to understand or interpret the hadith, but as if now he is talking about some sort of psychology in me. I do see scholars as if the experts of religion lower than experts of philosophy. And this is becoming a major wrong starting point in me, which is eventually also leading me to fall into the trap that we have been discussing so far. I mean, to me, I am taking this 12th also as investigating my psychology, saying that you have this, if you like, sort of a inferiority complex, if you would like to take it as such. And I might be thinking that philosophers are cooler and more advanced than the best of, or the most expert people in religion. And as a result, I look down on what religious interpretation is in the first place. And I value more what the philosophy is saying about, as in the example, the shape of earth, size of earth, whatever. And because of that, the author is as if implying that this inferiority complex of yours is because of not realizing the differences in the worldviews. And you are trying to, or you are looking at the lens of philosophical worldview, and this is why you are seeing the other worldview, the messenger's worldview, and which is being now elaborated by the scholars, and they came up with interpretations for those hadith, and you still feel like these people are wasting their time, or they are just doesn't make sense. So something like this. What do you think?
Yeah, please raise your hand and share your thoughts. I think that the point you bring up is like there is like a switch here, or he's kind of addressing this idea that we have where there's like this inferiority complex for like scholars that we have, like scholars are, but almost the text seems like with the perspective that we have actually, and I kind of got this off the text too. It's like scholars are working with some divine truths and like sacred elevated truths on the path of legacy. I mean, the legacy of the prophethood. Whereas scientists or these philosophers, they're just like backwards thinking. They're just dealing with very small matters that they're not important. But then, if I look to my life, what is most valuable for me? Who are the people that are most valuable for me? And like, it's my day-to-day life activities in which, the car makers or the modern amenities that I have or the other things that science has brought to me, that's like the view I have. And that's why these scientists and philosophers are so important for me, or that I view them higher, because in my mind, they're providing me with the things I need. That's a perspective that I have. They're the one that are providing me with the things I need. Whereas I look at scholars or other people, I'm just like, yeah, what you're doing seems cool and stuff. And like, yeah, it's divine truths. And like, I give them their own like respect kind of, but a distant respect. Cause like I haven't investigated into this, or I haven't really seen like the perils of my ways, or I haven't really like seen that what's going to truly satisfy me, or the things that I really need is what these scholars or like this belief perspective will bring me. Because of that, I don't value them. But then Nursi, I guess here is saying like perspective that you have is at fault. With I guess realizing or looking with the correct perspective, you're going to see that these scholars in this perspective of belief that the legacy of the prophethood, this is like what brings you truths that the scientists cannot even compare to. But if you have anyone has any thoughts on this, please raise your hand. Aishinur had her hand up as well. Would she like to go?
Yeah, I don't have I think Brother Yusuf raised interesting points, and I want to talk about them maybe a little bit later. I was just going to, but let me just mention something that I wanted to say. It's interesting how he's contrasting the approach and view of the scientists with that of the Quran or people of the Quran. Seems like science can go so far as to describe the physical order that I participate in. But beyond it, this earth seems to me a hectic, diseased, polluted ball that only gives me anxiety, stress, and despair. And the other viewpoint that he's expounding on is of a drastically different picture of the world that I'm located in. It's a cradle, he says, and I find that a very interesting word choice. A cradle is where I am looked after, sustained, and cared for, where mercy upon mercy is endowed upon me. And he also says, it's a seedbed for eternal gardens, for growth. Whereas without this perspective, I simply find darkness, right? I see a graveyard where the tiniest virus is enough to pile up corpses upon each other, where my anxieties, my worries are fueled by expectations that seem insurmountable and aspirations that never seem to end and find a resolution. And maybe some of this is things that we always mention and talk about, but I felt like I lived this very closely today with some stuff that's been going on academically. And I need solace. I need a solution to the problems I face every day, to that which clenches my jaw throughout the day. And this Quranic worldview identifies my most undeniable reality, right? That I am weak, and despite this weakness, the stresses upon my soul are those that will water my potential for reflection and for realization and of the meaning and art and beauty that's being granted in this existence. So I'll count myself as foremost to usually dismiss Nursi on these contrasts that he sometimes makes and sometimes seems to make quite frequently in various different places of, you know, one perspective and approach versus the other one. But like I need solutions that are close to my heart, that are close to what I feel and undergo each day. And you know, I don't know, this sort of Quranic worldview, at least here, seems to really hit on that note.
Yeah, thank you. I think you touch a great point, and also by giving examples about like your daily activities and like how it makes it like more personal for us, or like more true for us, because somehow I guess maybe we get lost. We're thinking that, you know, I'm going to finish this project, or I'm going to go to this place to work, or I'm going to do this and that, or you know, they're going to go to Mars, or we're going to have electric cars, or we're going to you know, we're going to fix healthcare and all these things. You know, you have all these issues, or like, you know, maybe they're not scientific, but they're like more just worldly, or just they look to the world for itself, which I would say is like basically scientific. It's the science of, let's say, humans, or it's the science of like society, let's say. But in this scientific lens, you think these things will solve your issues, or you think like being able to go to Mars, or like this will like give you salvation, or it's going to like make things better, or having a higher food production. I don't know. There's so many things that you can think about, which you think will provide you solace, or will provide you some refuge from all the problems that you face day to day. But in reality, when you just take a step back and then you just look at it, like you're just chasing one thing after another, you're going like this endless cycle of just chasing things, or like trying to find things that are going to solve your problems, but they never do, or they never can. They're just all very shallow in terms of the solutions they give you. Like they don't, as Brother Muhammad Sayyid was saying, like this question of why does this exist, or how do I exist? It's such a fundamental question, basically at our core, that we need an answer to, that we are like in thirst of. We're thirsty, like we're like fasting, let's say, of this question of why do I exist? Like, but we need the iftar of this question. You know, we need to somehow find the answer to this. But instead, like when we're just chasing things around with a scientific perspective, it doesn't help us. It doesn't satisfy us. It doesn't save us from all those worries that we have and all those problems that we have. Brother Sayyid, please go ahead.
Yeah, you know, reading this 12th principle, and sort of touching on what Yusuf and Aishanur said, what I found interesting is that, you know, at the beginning it says, since prophethood, the affirmation of divine unity and belief all look to unity, the hereafter and divinity. They see truth and reality in accordance with those. While philosophers and science look to multiplicity, causes, and nature, and see in accordance with them. You know, what's interesting is that science and the philosophy of science, especially certain fields of science, let's say physics, they're always looking for the simplest, most elegant solution, the one that can explain everything. I mean, let's say like even in medicine, like when you're trying to come up with a diagnosis, if somebody has X, Y, and Z symptom, they're trying to find the simplest, the unifying diagnosis that ties everything together. So man is sort of, you know, ingrained with that idea that the simplest, not in the way of it being simple, but the clearest and the most concise explanation must be the right one. But they do quite the opposite, though, in order to avoid it when it comes to what things mean. So, whereas it's easy, as you said, to look to X thing, Y thing, and Z thing and look at them independently, as independent processes, when it comes to trying to find what ties everything together, they try to avoid that. and say, I'm going to come up with some quote unquote something that I find elegant, but is far more complex than what actually is what actually is happening. So, and as Yusuf pointed out, it's because, it seems a bit, I think it's probably, something, like by and large, a Western tradition, but this sort of contrast between science and religion, because it seems like religion, quote unquote religion, or if you think of religion as some sort of separate domain, its solution seems far-fetched, or it's not testable, because that solution doesn't look to a cause in and of itself, like in the material world. So it's sort of baseless, even though it's the only explanation that makes sense, and that's like in conformity with reality, or how things actually are. So it sounds impressive to know many things, to know facts, minutia, details, as he points out. But when you actually listen to people who talk, or I mean, not even experts, just when you're having a conversation with anyone, or if yourself, when you're just speaking facts, you are not giving a solution, as I should have pointed out. You're just restating things you observed. There's no actual solution that's being put forth. So, in this regard, a scientist and as Norsi's pointing out, doesn't actually address anything. And the quote unquote solution they're trying to come up with isn't a solution. It's just another sort of observation of reality. They think it's a solution, but it's not. And the last thing I would say is, if it weren't so concise and obvious, the affirmation of divine unity, the hereafter, and everything that looks to divine unity, then most people would not be able to understand it. Most people couldn't believe, for that matter, which is a sort of a contradiction to divine unity. It would come to the point that only the quote unquote scholars would be able to believe. Just like if I want to know, let's say string theory. Well, I'm not a string theorist, so I don't really understand string theory and its like details. It's minutia. But honestly, anybody can understand belief. You don't even have to be quote unquote educated. You don't even have to be literate, for that matter. And that in and of itself is a sort of affirmation of divine unity. Because everyone and anything and everyone can believe and come up with the most concise and elegant solution to what things mean, to who they are and what they're doing here. And you don't need somebody who's quote unquote, superior in education to that holds on to that truth for you. So it's interesting. It's as he points out, the complete contrast between the two, and I think that's the danger. Like as you pointed out, is because I think it's man's inclination. You hold people who know things up on pedestals, whether they're scientists or who you think are scholars, but it's because like we don't recognize that they both may be talking about facts. That's nothing more than observation. Anybody can make an observation, for that matter. But the question is, are they talking about, what things point to? And anybody can affirm that. And that's what man is really sort of interested in, if he really is honest with himself.
Yeah, thank you. I think this idea that we need, or the things that we are seeking should be beneficial for us. Like the truths that we are seeking should be beneficial for us. They shouldn't just be minutia. They shouldn't just be some knowledge out there. They should actually be things that I can take and that can help me in my personal like struggles that I have. Actually, this reminds me, today I saw a video about this, I think like 97-year-old philosopher. A friend has sent this video, and just touching on the topic of like we need things to be beneficial for us. And so I was just watching this video, and this philosopher was talking about how he, like, I think he was a professor for 40 years, and he even wrote books on death, and like he was studying like me, I guess, like he was studying death, and like he even like said like he came to the conclusion that you shouldn't even it wasn't rational to even fear death because you're just gonna go into nothingness. Like, why do you shouldn't have to fear it or something. Like he wrote something like that. But then, you know, come to this video where he's like 97 years old, and he's saying, even though I came to such a like rational conclusion, the truth is I do fear death. He says it haunts me. Like, this idea of death is haunting him. And I was just thinking that he dedicated his life really to this work of trying to figure out like what is death, what is, like, let's say, life, you know, philosophy. He dedicated his life, he wrote books on it, he studied it. And at the end, I see that all his life's work does not help him. It does not benefit him because he is still being haunted by those questions that he spent his life studying. It just seems that, I guess, the perspective is just wrong, because the perspective that he was approaching from, all the truths that he was ever going to get were going to be very dim. They were not going to satisfy him. They were not going to be beneficial. Whereas, which is why we see the value of the, you know, the people of the Quran, or the Quran, what the message that's brought to us is, like, as you said, even like, let's say, like, you don't need some intense lifelong studying to understand the message of the Quran. This message of the fact that La ilaha illallah, like, you don't need to study this for your whole life to just like reach that. Like, even being able to say La ilaha illallah, like, it gives you so much relief from this idea of death. But yeah, so just the benefits that we get from the truths that we seek is very, I wanted to make emphasis on that. And then there is a comment. It's a quote.
Sure. Yeah, this discussion just kind of reminded me of this quote that I had seen and screenshotted it and pocketed away for some occasion like today. It says, "When I survey my life, it seems to me to be a useless one, devoted to impossible ideals. My activities continue from force of habit, and in the company of others, I forget the despair which underlies my daily pursuits and pleasure. But when I am alone and idle, I cannot conceal from myself that my life had no purpose, and that I know of no new purpose to which to devote my remaining years. I find myself involved in a vast mist of solitude, both emotional and metaphysical, from which I could find no issue." And the one who's saying this is this very, very, very famous 20th century philosopher. And, you know, I just needed to say, obviously, this doesn't mean that we should call out philosophers and philosophy like in a gotcha moment, but, you know, the quote resonated with me, and I'm not a famous philosopher. And I think it can resonate with anyone despite their career choices, or, you know, religious identity, because, you know, it's definitely, I've been one where like busyness and the company of people, things, or anything really that can act as a distraction, I choose to occupy myself with, so that I kind of ignore that existential dread, if you will. But at the end of the day, whether you're in quarantine or not, whether you're isolated or not, the problems are there. And, you know, this doesn't mean that we shouldn't philosophize and try to find, or be scientists and try to find answers to things, but, you know, just the emotional and, as he says, metaphysical problems, the solitude, the inherent needs that I have, they remain. They're part and parcel to my humanness, and I need to, I don't want to say tackle them, because it's not something I should be battling with, but I need to address them, and I need to honestly evaluate them and seek answers for them.
Yeah. And just a quick addition, like Suhail was talking about, like the literacy that you need to be able to understand the Quran. That you don't have to be very literate, actually. And I think this quote kind of touches on that, because I think the only literacy you really need to understand the Quran is just to be a human, just to realize that, you know, you have these states where sometimes you're in solitude and you need like these emotional and metaphysical, like you have emotional and metaphysical needs. Like you just need to be a human and realize your human needs. Really. Suhail, go ahead.
You know, I just wanted to add, when he says that no certain fact of science can touch the sacred truths of the Quran. You know, I don't know if this is how the author translated it, but it's interesting that it's the third paragraph. He says, furthermore, when something is considered from 2 points of view, it shows 2 different truths, and both of them may be the truth. No certain fact of science can touch the sacred truths of the Quran. Which I find interesting, his phrasing, and I'm not sure if that's what he actually wrote, but it's almost in a way he's saying science in and of itself isn't truth. It's just facts. And that's what he's saying. I agree with him. They're just facts. And for that matter, the only reason, you brought up this philosopher, I shouldn't have quoting him, or the things you brought up earlier. The only reason that at least I've concluded that man does anything, really. In other words, why he tries to pursue these sciences, whatever they may be, physical, non-physical, whatever this classification is. But in any case, it's because they're driven by, sacred truths, in that man doesn't want to perish into non-existence, so he's trying to find some replacement for that. Man doesn't want to be in pain, so he's trying to find some solution to that within the world. Those are essentially sacred because they're God-given, those like qualities, but the solutions have no divinity in them whatsoever. I don't want to, go into nothingness. So I'm going to find something that's going to, let's say, prolong my life and keep me healthy and, make my life as comfortable as possible. And I'm not denying those things, but there's no Godhead in them. There's no divinity. There's no divine unity in those things in and of themselves. But man realized that's what he wants, and which is sacred. It's honestly beyond material things themselves, those qualities, and he's trying to find a solution within material things. Whereas if he just simply looked to what his creator was saying, let's say in the Quran, he would find the sacred answer, or in other words, those sacred truths. Facts aren't truths in the way that I think he's putting it, because these truths he's talking about to me are sort of solutions. They're answers. Whereas if you just tell me that the sun is 93 million miles away, I would just, pat you on the back and say, good job, but that doesn't really answer anything. That's why science has a short hand, because its hand only reaches out to this world. So that I found that interesting as well.
Yeah, thank you. The shorthand really just can only reach out to this world. That helps me understand the imagery in the mind. Brother Bikram, you had your hand up if you'd like to make your comment, or whenever you want to, please feel free to make your comment. So, I'll read the last paragraph one more time because I liked it, and then we can conclude this principle with this. So the last paragraph. It is because of this vastness of meaning and importance of art of the earth that the all-wise Quran holds it like a tiny fruit of the vast tree of the heaven, equal to all the heavens, like holding a tiny heart equivalent to a huge body. It places it in one pan of the scales and places all the heavens in the other, and repeatedly says, Sustainer of the heavens and the earth. Compare other matters with this, understand that the soulless dim truths of philosophy cannot clash with the brilliant living truths of the Quran. Since the point of view is different, they appear differently. So here, Nursi is saying how the perspective of belief, you transform this earth that previously you're just calling a rock flying around the sun in a galaxy, you transform it into something that becomes the fruit of the universe, the fruit of the heavens. And I just want to, I guess, make my point before I hand it to the mic. He even somehow connects this with the Quran. Quran, there's a verse, Sustainer the heavens and the earth. There's a very common verse. And how Nursi is reading this is saying that the importance of the earth is being on the same scale as the rest of the heavens. The earth is just as important as the rest of the heavens in the sky. And the earth is just this tiny rock, it's this tiny fruit in this huge, magnificent universe that is a tree. So this is like what kind of perspective or view you can have when you're a people of the Quran. And I think there's a lot maybe there's more to dig in there, but I'll leave the comment to Aisha again. If Bikram wants to speak, he can go ahead, but I don't think he's available at the moment.
So I wanted to make a comment because you said we were going to conclude this 12th principle. I wanted to, just before we move on, go back a little bit to the second paragraph of the 12th principle. And I know Brother Yusuf kind of talked a bit about this. There's, I think, a reason he mentions this. He says, those who do not understand this mystery suppose investigative scholars of Islam to be relatively backwards to philosophers. So there's, and if we think about sort of the intellectual milieu that Nursi is writing in, there's certainly an inferiority complex to the philosophers of the West, right? To the philosophers of the Anglo-American tradition. But I don't think here it's just hey, don't worry though, like our Islam people are still better. I don't want to, I'm kind of telling this to myself, run into this sort of simplistic rendering of it either, because when he said scholars of Islam, at first I was thinking, who is he talking about? Because there's so many people, at least within my own limited studies, that are kind of submerged, I would say, in the same limitations that the philosophers have been submerged in, that have kind of that are not addressing the Quranic gems that Nursi himself is presenting and saying that, look at what the Quranic worldview offers. So it's not just this dichotomy between Muslim scholars and non-Muslim scholars, but more of a dichotomy between, I think it's important that he says, the investigative scholars of Islam. Those who did not just reiterate or just recycle or just kind of passively imitate markers and identifiers of religiosity, because that also does not help us in any way. That also does not progress forward to any sort of human need that we have. So yeah, I just wanted to also mention that I don't know if anyone else has anything to say on that matter. Yeah.
No, thank you. I remember I also I touched on that as well, because it seems, you know, there is like this saying, the sacred, you know, divine sciences, the exalted divine sciences is much greater than, you know, what these scientists are looking at. There's almost like that type of theme there, but you know, going off all what we all spoke about in this discussion, and the fact that, you know, how we're saying that science has a very shorthand, you know, science is only looking at this earth, and how we need much more than that. We need much more than just a shallow observation of how things are. And this is something that investigative scholars of Islam are bringing into the table, or that's what Islam is for, or that is what religion and, let's say, prophethood is for, is so that you can reach farther than the earth, so that you can reach into the heavens from the earth. So we have the last 10 minutes, inshallah, or we can end earlier as well, because it seems people are tired. And I think we covered this principle pretty well. If anyone would like to make like some final remarks, yes, Brother Yusuf, go ahead.
And also it's interesting the way he is concluding this third branch with this Rabbus Samawati wal Ard, the creator, sustainer of the heavens and the earth. Again, as if he is going to use this as a stepping stone for what he is going to study in the fourth branch. So I really like the way author is structuring the branches as if we are climbing a tree. So we started with the first branch, the names being manifest in the existence. In the second branch, he talked about different ways. And in there, he made us first compare philosophy versus path of prophethood. Now in this third branch, he talked about how to evaluate hadith, and while doing that, he gave us a prophetic perspective and how the prophet was speaking and how I am supposed to understand his speech. And now at the end of it, he is bringing the discussion to a specific, or maybe major, the very core of prophetic message of sustainer of the heavens and the earth. Looking at the existence from that perspective, he first took us to there. So because Rabb, like sustainer, provider, and my response to Rabb, to my sustainer, is my worship. And the prophet had been the he was the person who is looking at existence from that perspective. He himself first must have been the perfect example of seeing this balance and practicing this response. So you observe the sustainership and respond to this sustainership with worship. Messenger being the best example of that, and then being the teacher for the rest of us. And then this relationship of sustainership versus worship is another major core. And I guess now he is going to talk about this in depth when we go to the fourth branch. Inshallah, we will read it next week. But so it's beautiful that I like the transitions that are being made. And as if now we are climbing a tree. And as he was saying, I guess at the very beginning, was it at the very beginning of 24th word, saying that climb through this tree and eat the fruits of the fifth branch. So inshallah we are, yeah. So at the very beginning of this 24th word, he was saying that this word is 5 branches. Pay attention to the fourth branch and cling to the 5th branch and climb over it and eat its fruits. So inshallah, I guess we are going towards this.
Inshallah, we're going to climb a tree together and hopefully cling the 5th branch, whatever it has. and eat its fruits and not fall. Yeah. So I think I can end here. I'll just open the floor to all your comments, whether you think it's worth sharing or not worth sharing. I'd still say you should share. I'll just open the floor to everyone. Take a pause, and if you just wait for you to raise your hand up for a few more seconds. Yes, Brother Mamsi, go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum. I would like to use the time to think aloud, inshallah, about this. It reminded me something. The last, not the last paragraph. Sorry. This. Those who do not understand this mystery suppose the investigative scholars of Islam to be relatively backward to the philosophers. It reminded me myself feeling. There is a, when I open myself to the discourse that is being used in the schools, in educational places, formal educational places, or in the media in general, the way that a phenomenon is being discussed, a fact is being let's say contemplated over, the way that it is being talked about. When I get used to that way of talking about and hearing about the things, like for example, there is a pandemic, and then there is a certain way of people, let's say a way of approaching this pandemic nowadays. Let's say people are usually focusing on a moment that this pandemic is going to leave, so that we are going to go back to our normal life. When I get used to that way of approaching to the experiences, to the things in here in the earth, and then I become kind of alienated to the other way of talking about the things, like this is a gift coming from the sustainer of the earth, so it is a great opportunity to focus over the life we are given, and how fragile it is, and how important it is to be aware of our reality and such. I become alienated to this approach, and then whoever takes this approach becomes like, what this guy is talking about? Everyone is talking about the pandemic, how to get rid of it, and this guy is saying that it's an opportunity, and since it is coming from the sustainer, you know what I mean? So I felt that it is a reality, but it depends on me, the way that I choose to kind of train myself, or the way I approach my life and the experiences I'm having in this life, and how do I approach them? Do I leave my brain and my ears to the others to fill them, or do I have any certain question that belongs to me, and then I go after them to so that I will have kind of a mechanism of elimination? It doesn't work for me. Okay, this is what I need. So that's how I take this sentence to myself. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. That was actually very helpful for me as well. Brother Brikan, please go ahead.
So I will probably mostly repeat what others said, especially Muhammad, and a few comments before Yusuf. So this principle it's talking about a very generic principle of how to approach reality, not only narrations. And it says, like, there are different ways to look at the same thing. And it's not that one of them is true, the other one is false. They both have truth in them. It's not about, the hierarchy of who's telling the bigger truth or smaller truth. But it's about whether it takes you somewhere or not. The same way, when you read narrations, don't forget this principle. When you read narrations, do not get lost with the minute details that are not meant to be even considered, or, I don't know, discussed or thought about. Whether the person, referred in the narration lived in 7th century or 3rd century, whatever. Do not get lost in them, but look at them from the perspective of divine unity. Look at them from the perspective of hereafter, and try to see how they take you from earth to heaven, how they take you from this world to hereafter. And as Muhammad Said was saying, this is the same with everything. So we are so lost in reading the universe, reading ourselves, reading life within a perspective which doesn't take us to anywhere. Despite it is full of truths, because it doesn't take us anywhere, so maybe you should change your perspective. So when you change your perspective, it's not you're abandoning the truth that the other perspective provides you. It's not, what people call it, like post-truth, whatever. It's not about that. It's not about, denying what is in front of you, but making sense of them, putting them in another perspective. The same sun can cause you anxiety and fear when you think it is a fireball floating on top of you, or the same sun can give you comfort and pleasure when you think your sustainer put a firewall on top of you so that your life will be illuminated. So the same fact, same truth, but one takes you somewhere, the other one doesn't take you anywhere. The same thing with pandemic. You may spend your entire life trying to define what pandemic is. Oh, do you know what? We're defining pandemic this way, but maybe if we define pandemic that way, it will cause, it will give us a better economic growth, or it will fit better in our understanding of health. It will have a, the higher metaphysical or ontological, the value. So I will, spend my time trying to define what pandemic is. And it will not take you anywhere. But again, Abdul Rahman was saying, this is not about whether the thing you are talking about is religious or not. You can apply the same perspective to religious manners as well. You try to define what angels are. You try to define what prophet is or prophethood is, and try to, find let's say, a description of things. And you would say, okay, this is a better description of things. And at the end, the question is whether what you are doing is taking you somewhere or not, whether it is saving you or not. When you try to approach things from this perspective, people will call you names. They will say, this is your personal understanding, this is your subjective belief, this is your X, this is your Y. And they will say this is not as good as you know, the truths that we are dealing with. I'm trying to define pandemic, and I can test it, whatever. But other sense, it's just the other way around. If you find your comfort in, if you find your satisfaction in the second perspective, if you take you to the truth of the hereafter, then this is what valuable is. So yeah, that's all.
Thank you. Both yours and Mohammed Said's comments, they this idea that, you know, if we did just come out today and said, no, the pandemic, this virus is not a terrible thing, it is actually a gift from God, or this, or we said that, you know, it's a beautiful thing, you know, we might be derided, you know, we might be called, you know, like bad words, or like these people are speaking nonsense, you know, people might make fun of someone who said these things, and it's similar, like it's like how maybe we can look at the scholars, or because we're like so stuck in some type of view that we might look at some investigative scholars or other people who come with this idea of belief, and we kind of just dismiss them. But then, as Brother Brikan is saying, and as others have said, it's where is this taking you? Are you being saved or not? Is this helping you? That's what is valuable for you. It's not them name calling you or making fun of you. You should instead be like, let's say, open your mind and try to find something that takes you elsewhere, that helps you, so that it's valuable for you. Thank you for all your comments and contributions, and everyone that attended to help us understand this text in Ramadan in these times. I'm very thankful. I will then end the discussion here, inshallah. If there are no objections. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم وآخر دعواهم أن الحمد لله رب العالمين